I became fascinated in what makes us who we are and how we can shift out of pain and suffering. I was equally interested in how people navigate through very significant challenges, what those impacts are when you're in the world of work, because I understood as a child growing up in this environment, all the ripple effects for an adult in the working world of not feeling like they're performing to their true potential, they're not able to provide for their family in the way they want to, et cetera. And I saw up close all the fallout from that, including people who had once, achieved great heights, and suddenly they found themselves on the outs. Let's refocus on you defining what you want and you selecting yourself and you presenting yourself for opportunities that make you want to jump up and, be excited and get out of bed in the morning.
Welcome to the Thought Leader Revolution with Nikki Ballou. Join the revolution. There's never been a better time in history to speak your truth, find your freedom, and make your fortune. Each week, we interview the world's top thought leaders and learn the secrets of how they built a 6 to 7 figure practice. This episode has been brought to you by eCircleacademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. I'm your host, Nikki Ballou. And boy, do we have an exciting guest lined up for you today. Today's guest is a dear friend of mine. She's my sister from another mister. She also happens to be one of the world's leading thought leaders, helping folks who are senior executives in professional situations who have kind of plateaued, who are kind of not making progress the way that they want to. And she helps them transform and transcend all that and live their best life within their corporate career. I am speaking, of course, of none other than the one, the only, the legendary Courtney Intersimone. Welcome to the show, Courtney.
Hey, Nikki. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So, Courtney, I know you super well. I know how awesome you are. But my listener doesn't yet know how awesome you are. So tell us your backstory. How'd you get to be the great Courtney Intersimone?
That's a great question. No. So my backstory is I grew up, don't worry, I'm not going to give you every last detail, but I grew up the child of 2 teachers. And there's a reason why I'm sharing that. But I grew up the child of 2 teachers, both of whom were Ivy League graduates. And there was a huge respect for learning and ideas in my household. And the reason I mention this is that I did not grow up in a house of business people, right? It was not on my radar that I was going to be working in a large corporate organization, or frankly, that I was going to ever own my own business. And what I was focused on growing up was, the love of learning, which I still carry with me to this day, and being of service to other people. And that piece around service was also very much born of what I observed happening in my family, and particularly to people that I care deeply about, starting with my father, who was a brilliant man, wonderful, full of life, great athlete, great looking guy, super smart, first in his family to go to college, went to Princeton, didn't even know really what it was before he landed there. And also deeply scarred by severe struggles with bipolar disorder. And I bring that up to say that I think from a very young age, I became fascinated in, what makes us who we are and how we can shift out of pain and suffering. Now, my dad was basically functioning more or less fine all of my years growing up. Thankfully, he was maintained, his challenges with mental health were largely addressed through medications and what have you. But there were reverberating effects of that, which directly impacted his sense of self and his professional life. Mm. Another thing that was going on for him, even irrespective of some of those challenges, was as a teacher, he was loved. He was an English teacher, always got the best ratings. However, he was in a shrinking school district, and every year, come end of the school year, his role would be eliminated because the school district didn't know if they were going to have another opportunity come the fall. And it was a last in, first out. It wasn't about how well you did, right? It wasn't a meritocracy. Now, inevitably, he would end up being rehired right around Labor Day. But you can imagine this was a very, distressing experience. And also, although he knew it had nothing to do with his skills and abilities, it was created a significant amount of self-doubt, regardless of that knowledge. And, a feeling of a lack of worthiness, right? And he valiantly moved through that as best he could, right? And he went on to do other things, including owning a restaurant and, in fact, becoming a counselor later in his life and, touching a lot of people very positively. But the point is, on my backstory, this is what I came from. And I was, like I said before, equally interested in how people navigate through very significant challenges, what those impacts are when you're in the world of work. And I wanted to bring those two things together and see how I could aid other people on their journey, because I understood as a child growing up in this environment how all the ripple effects for an adult in the working world of not feeling like they're performing to their true potential, they're not able to provide for their family in the way they want to, et cetera. So roll the clock on, and I got a master's degree in psychology, and I thought I was going to go on and be a therapist. But I realized that where I really wanted to be was in the context of work in the business world. And the most likely thing for me to do, at least as far as I saw it at that point, was to move into human resources, which I did. And I took a job on Wall Street, which was the last place on earth I thought you would ever find me. But nonetheless, the opportunity appeared and I took it. And I got, among other things, a real education along the way on how people's careers evolve and how many people who on paper, who are extremely talented and they had all the right credentials, would only get so far, and then often they would fizzle out. And then there were people who had perhaps lesser seeming, credentials and, the right schools and all that kind of thing. And, or didn't even graduate from college, which is completely fine. And they would go on to the C-suite. And I just became really interested in what makes the difference here? And that put me on this path of, pursuing the answer to that question, right? And along the way, I was also growing as a leader, and I had no immediate model to follow in my household. And so I just went on a multi-year journey of self-discovery. I hired my own coaches along the way and, talked and learned and observed from those around me. And part of my role within the human resources function was to serve as an advisor to leaders and help them upskill their capabilities. But my role was also around helping leaders make decisions about who was going to get promoted, why they were going to get promoted, who was going to perhaps, be demoted, if you will, or layered in an organizational restructuring. And I saw up close all the fallout from that, including people who had once, achieved great heights, and suddenly the deck chairs moved and they found themselves without, a sponsor, and they found themselves on the outs, and they couldn't explain it to themselves. And many of whom, crashed and burned such that they never really recovered from that. And it was so unnecessary. So I also, in this, witnessed people who took a tumble, who were once shining stars, but then, for one reason or another, were no longer viewed as having the potential for the next level. Maybe there was a change in leadership above them. They were no longer, the select chosen few. And I saw some who were impacted by that, who, yes, had a large wobble, but then were able to reinvent themselves. And I studied closely what made it possible for those people to go on and reinvent themselves. And this is all channeled into, after 26 years on the inside doing this, this has all led to me starting my own coaching practice, where I'm specifically targeting working with those high achieving corporate leaders who find themselves in a plateau, and whether they came to that plateau in their ascension gradually, or, as is more often the case, it was an abrupt halt that's inexplicable to them because the rules that they were playing by that seemed to get them regular promotions and, other kinds of recognition and reward seem to no longer be working. I'm focusing on helping those people get their mojo back, because there's nothing more painful than losing that, not knowing why, and feeling like your most productive years are behind you prematurely. So that's basically my whole story. I'm happy to elaborate on any of those pieces and, share some stories of people that I've worked with in this regard to illuminate those points. But where would you like to take this?
That was a lot. So let me unpack a couple of items that I think are really powerful and germane. So I really like that phrase, the large wobble, and I like the other phrase, get your mojo back. So I really think those are powerful and ought to be, if they're not already, part of your branding and messaging. So the large career wobble, to me, that's a point worth exploring further, and maybe with a story. And the other one is, how do you get your mojo back when you have been a success and then you're stuck in the career wobble? Because the career wobble is like a zone that a lot of people get stuck in. Yeah. I remember being in corporate where I was in a career wobble a couple times. And the way I got unstuck was to go work somewhere else. Wasn't able to do it at the same company that I was in. And I just would love for you to maybe get deeper into what is a career wobble, and maybe give us a story around that.
Yeah, sure. So, One particular story comes to mind in this moment. A colleague who I worked with, we'll call him Bob. Bob was in a role as the, chief branding officer as part of the larger marketing organization within a Fortune 200 financial services firm. So he's in a very senior role. He was also about 58 years old. And that is relevant here because of some of his concerns, rightly placed, around age discrimination. Prior to that role, he had a very, I can't find the word I want to use here. Luminous. It's not quite the right word, but he was a well-recognized figure in the marketing sphere within financial services, and he had worked at a different organization prior, also in a very high-level role. He was extremely well-regarded, invited to be a judge at exclusive events in his industry and so forth. Anyway.
He'd had an illustrious career. And he was doing great. And in fact, he was hired into our organization away from this other place by
a person who was a relatively new chief marketing officer at this organization. And then that person who brought him in, the chief marketing officer, fell out of favor with a new CEO. She left. He was exposed in that, not that he suddenly changed and he wasn't good, but he didn't have that person there advocating for him when he wasn't in the room. Fine. A new person comes into the role. And here's the kicker. The new person who comes in as the chief marketing officer used to work for this guy, used to work for Bob. So now we have that switched thing. You're working for the person who used to work for you. And suddenly he's not being invited to certain meetings that he should be at anymore. He's kind of finding himself out of the loop on things. And roll the clock on. And the long story short is he gets told about 6 months later that, Bob, you're great, this and that, but we're going to have to eliminate your position. We're going to restructure, the department, and it's nothing about you, but, your role is going away. So here he is, 58. He was riding high for a really long time. He hasn't changed anything about his approach. So why should things suddenly be different? Why is he on the outs? And now he's got to start a job search. And he was really shaken by this. Couldn't understand quite what had gone wrong. What should he have been doing differently? And now he was plagued by the concern that, I've got a head full of white hair. I otherwise look vital, but let's be honest, there's a lot of discrimination out there, and I'm nowhere near ready to retire. I feel, just as enthusiastic about leading teams and, defining award-winning campaigns as I ever did, but who's going to hire me now, right? And so that sense of, I wouldn't say desperation in terms of he wasn't going to be going on the breadline anytime soon, but it wasn't about the money. It was about, I want to still contribute. I want to still be able to make an impact. And I feel like completely out of control about what happened here. And even though they told me that the reason my role was eliminated had nothing to do with me or my skills, I'm wondering if that was just a polite way to let me down. Maybe there was something wrong. So the wobble became, can I ever get back to who I was? What happened to that person? What am I not projecting out into the world to have that recognized and taken advantage of? So, and also maybe I should just pack it in because, I'm almost 60 and who's going to hire me kind of thing. So we came to be working together. And I think the first thing that I have people focus on, and this might sound counterintuitive, but is to allow themselves to feel the feelings that they're having. I'm not a believer in let's just jump in and pretend that this doesn't hurt or isn't painful. But we put a time boundary on that. How much time do you want to spend licking your wounds? It's okay to do that. And then when you're ready, we're going to move forward full force and put you back in connection with who the hell you really are. And he was ready to move forward on that within, a week. He did not want to continue in a place of feeling sorry for himself. And so then we focused on reconnecting him to all of the accomplishments, all of the achievements, all of the incredible things that he's done in his life. And at the same time, getting his focus off of why did this thing change over here? I don't know that you can, I'm gesturing, but to forget all of that. And let's refocus on you defining what you want and you selecting yourself and you presenting yourself for opportunities that make you want to jump up and, be excited and get out of bed in the morning, as opposed to coming from a frame of, is anyone going to want me? Let's put this back into, what do you want? What are you going to, contribute? What value are you going to bring? How are you going to solve problems? And focus on that and get your head out of this, they didn't want me anymore. Maybe they didn't. Who cares? There's a lot of other theys out there. This reminds me of a story that I saw recently of Meryl Streep, the famous Oscar-winning actress, who was talking about how she was once rejected because she was told she wasn't pretty enough for some role. And, that's a hurtful thing. And what she said to the person was, well, that's fine, but that's one opinion. Yours is one opinion of many opinions. And, I'm going to keep going forward. And as she notes, she's acquired 18 Oscars. And I share that story, afterwards. And I share that story a lot with my clients because it goes to the point that I'm making. Not everyone is going to love you. Things may change, but what hasn't changed is your core value and what you bring to the table, and cultivating your own self-belief in that is the first and fundamental thing that's going to help you transcend the wobble. There's a lot of tactics I use, to do that with folks, but that's the first thing. Then, of course, we got into the tactics of what's your story, what's your narrative, what's your brand positioning, all that good stuff. Tactical things around resume, heavy emphasis on networking and leveraging relationships, of which he had many. And again, focusing on how can I, Bob, take all of my incredible gifts and share them with the world to solve problems that need to be solved out there, and having conversations about that, and not feeling like you're going around hat in hand asking people to give you a job. That's not what this is about. And so I was able to help him to shift his stance, his come from. And to make a long story longer, I'm very pleased to say that he landed a job that ended up paying him, and he was already earning, probably about $500,000 a year level type of earner. He got another opportunity as a chief brand officer for a premier large, Fortune 100 brand, earning like a couple $100,000, I would say, more than he was earning before. And we keep in touch, and he loves it. And it's a much better culture, and he's appreciated, and life is great again. And he turned 60 and he's living his best life. So I don't want to, use this story to make it seem like it was all a straight line, but the point was, what is your decision about what your future is going to be? And are you letting someone else outside of you decide? Or are you going to decide what it is and then go after it? And along that path, to get you back into the mindset where you really have the level of self-belief that you need in order to accomplish that and in order to live that way, we've got to remind you of the truth of who you are.
I want to just unpack a bit of what you said here, because there's some good things in here as well. So You're talking about Bob, had an illustrious career, was recruited away from his existing firm to come to a new firm. The fellow who recruited him was on the outs. And that happens, right? The person who
a year later.
Does get out of favor. They get fired. That happens.
Yep.
And when a new team comes in, what's normal is that whoever was associated with the old person is not going to necessarily be looked at like, hey, we want to keep you. They're going to look at you and go, I think I want to replace you with someone I know from my background and whatnot, which is normal, right?
Yep.
And I think that's powerful, because there's a lot of people in senior roles that have probably gone through this. And self-doubt, 100%. they don't want me. There's a level of rejection there. It's like you asked out the pretty girl to the prom and she said no. She went out with your best friend instead. You know what I mean? That's just like,
it hurts. It hurts.
My God.
Yeah.
What does he have that I don't have? Like that kind of stuff comes through. And then what I think was powerful here is that you brought almost the energy of a big sister or a mom to Bob and said, "Hey, you're still a good dude, man. You're still okay. And let's take stock of who you really are, rather than what these people who didn't and weren't even going to give you a chance have to say about it, because their desire to bring in their own confidence has nothing to do with your worth,
skill."
Yeah, exactly. Any of that. And then you brought your secret sauce of how to go about tactically to go get a job. And the result was he landed a job that paid him 40% more, $200K more than what he was making before. I mean, I think that's fantastic. So, the pain here for Bob was the person who hired him was no longer there. So his sponsor was no longer there. And he lost his job. That's a real pain. I get it. That's powerful. That's a career obstacle that happens to any of us.
And with the added element of having it be at the hands of his former subordinate.
Yeah, his former subordinate. So that person probably had some issues and went on a bit of a power trip.
Maybe. I don't even, maybe. But even if it wasn't true, it was more the symbolism of it. And especially combined with his fears about age, which again are understandable. I mean, that's part of the society we still live in. And, she was younger and she's sort of like the new sheriff in town. And I don't think she had any particular animus towards him. They had previously had a great working relationship and he felt it was still okay. He was like a layer. There was another manager in between the two of them, but she represented the new regime coming in who wanted their hand-selected people. Yeah. And this happens, all the time. And I just want to inject one other piece. Yeah. I just want to inject one other piece here, and I don't want to hijack the rest of the conversation, but this touches on another challenge that I see many high achievers come up against at one point or another. And it's this unwillingness or this somewhat naive trust in the notion that life, and particularly in the work professional sphere, is a meritocracy.
Yeah.
I.e., if I study hard and I get the grade on the test, I get promoted to the next grade, or, whatever. I get the award, I get the recognition. And that is just not reality. But what's fascinating to see is how some individuals, irrespective of the quantity of years of experience, life in the fast lane they've had, some of them still cling on to this paradigm. And then it becomes something that they then turn against themselves. What do I mean by that? Well, if it's a meritocracy, and if I get pushed out, that means by definition, I wasn't good enough. Versus when you start to understand that, again, particularly at the more, the closer you get to the C-suite, let's put it in those terms, that of course you've got to bring it, you've got to have the skills, capabilities, but that alone is not what's going to keep you in the game. And it's not in and of itself what's going to get you moving, ever higher. And if you recognize that, and you recognize that, as part of the mix, there's musical chairs, there's constant change. People want to bring in their own people. Like, it's much more tribal. We're talking about humans fundamentally, right? Then you can gain the perspective to know that it doesn't mean that you should feel good about the fact necessarily that you lost your role, but you don't have to make it mean that you don't have value to offer.
Yeah, that's pretty brilliant, actually. One of America's most respected presidents was President John F. Kennedy. And one of his most famous quotes was, "Life isn't fair." And that's a fact. And most people don't get that. They don't understand that. They want life to be fair. And it isn't.
Right.
It's sometimes you put yourself in situations where other human beings are involved. And if those other human beings make decisions, sometimes those decisions are going to go in your favor and sometimes they're not. One of my favorite writers is Robert Greene, who wrote the 48 Laws of Power, among other books. And Robert Greene has helped me understand in a way that's become abundantly clear to me that when you're dealing with human beings, there are dynamics that you need to understand. And those dynamics have very little to do with what's right, what's just, what's fair, and have everything to do with that person's self-concept about themselves. So if there's someone who has deep insecurities and you're someone who's very confident and you show them you're very confident and you work for them, that might not go so well for you because their deep insecurities are going to be bothered by your confidence. And he has some very unique and sometimes cynical approaches that he recommends you take in those situations. But I think there's some truth to what he's saying. And your client, Bob, even though he's 58, even though he had a lot of life experience, there's a part of him that had remained very young within. And he expected fairness. He expected meritocracy. He expected the good work that he did to be recognized. And he got a rude awakening. But thankfully, he had you to guide him through the landmine-infested waters that he found himself in, and he was able to land in a better situation. So I think that's a wonderful thing.
Right.
And the story that you told us is very powerful in that respect. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, myself. I just wanted to connect it back to, and not that it was my job to save my dad, right? We can go down that rabbit hole. But just like it wasn't my dad's fault or because of a lack in capacity or ability that led his job to being, as they use the phrase, accessed. What a terrible word, right? But I don't know what's worse, displaced, accessed, right? Because the school district that he was in was, right, the school district was shrinking. But even though on a logical, rational, sort of intellectual level, he could understand that. And we could even say maybe Bob understood it. The emotional reverberations that tie back to things that, we internalized from really, really young about the way the world is supposed to work, nipped at his heels and, in this example, nipped at Bob such that it risked kind of fully turning them over and turning against themselves. And again, I don't see myself as out here saving the world, and I'm not the hero here. And Bob got the job he got because of who he is and how he showed up, but he did the work. But what was vital and what I saw when he came to me with this story, when we first started working together, was I'm not going to let you go down that hole. You know what I mean? Like, we've got to nip this in the bud right now. We got to get you clear on exactly what happened here and what it means, and be very careful about what you're making it mean. Because what you're making it mean initially is I suck. That's not what it means. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm just super, super passionate about it because, as I said, I've seen what gets left in the wake of not turning that wobble around in terms of, you talk about someone's self-concept and all the things that flow from that. So, yeah. Now there are, go ahead, Nikki. You
listening to you and tell Bob's story, a few things come to mind for me, Courtney, and And I want to have a further discussion with you about this offline around your thought leadership, because I think this is an important revelation for me. That's why I'm really glad we're having this conversation. First of all, what happened to Bob at his age, at his tenure position within an organization, is something that happens all the time to very senior people in all kinds of organizations. I would imagine there are hundreds, if not thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of individuals over the age of 55, senior within an organization, that find themselves on the outs and find it difficult because of their own self-concept, the wobble that they felt, the lack of belief that it awakens in them, and they don't recover from that. And I believe that you can be a hero to them, because you can show them that that late career wobble does not need to be fatal. So that might not be a bad title for this episode. Your late career wobble doesn't have to be fatal, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm going to write that down. But the other thing that hits me from your thought leadership point of view is that you have a path out for these people, and that path depends more than anything on them having a good human being in their corner who believes in them. We talk about this inside of our work together, is that most good people go through rough times and they just need somebody to tell them it's going to be okay. You're great. This is temporary. Just so that temporary dispelling of their self-concept and belief doesn't end up becoming permanent. All they need is someone like you to be there for a period of time until the wobble self-corrects itself and their belief comes back up, and then they take all the actions they need to take. I mean, you see in our group, as an example, we've had a few people lately that have joined us. There's this lovely lady, Pamela, right? And she's older than you and I, and she was feeling a little blue because she hadn't gotten a client in a while and blah, blah, blah. And I got to tell you, I see just putting a little belief into Pamela. Look at this woman. She's on fire, man. She's 75 and she's outworking all of us. Like, I'm embarrassed.
I commented in our group today. She's my role model. Like, I want to be Pamela when I'm 75.
Damn straight. I want to be Pamela now at my age.
Yeah, right. Exactly. No, completely. All
it took for Pamela was for me to pour a little bit of self-belief in her, for Teresa and Mark to do the same, and she woke up. And it strikes me, Courtney, that within your branding and your messaging, you ought to be speaking to these late career wobble folks, senior folks, and it should all be about, hey, did this wobble happen to you? And if it did, are you starting to doubt yourself? Are you starting to believe that it's too late? You're not ready to retire, but it's too late for you to recapture your glory and go back on that trajectory of success. Because if that's your belief, I'm here to tell you, Balderdash, we're going to fix it for you. Not only is it not real that this is it, you're done. Your best days are yet ahead of you. Another of America's most respected and greatest president. In fact, my favorite American president of all time is Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan said about America, when he got elected in 1980, a lot of Americans were starting to believe Jimmy Carter, who said, there's a malaise, America, this is it, it's not going to get much better. And Reagan said, Balderdash, America's a shining city on a hill whose best days are still ahead of her. And he made the American people believe. I study presidencies and leadership because I'm fascinated by leadership, right?
Oh, that's amazing, And
I don't know if you knew this, but of the last, say, until Kennedy, from Kennedy till today, there's only one president that left office way more popular than he came in. You know who that was? Reagan.
Reagan?
Why? Yeah. Because he believed in the people, and he kept telling them, you're great, you're amazing, you're awesome, this is America, you're going to, imagine that. A politician who actually likes the people he's leading versus politicians who don't, who just want to be in power. And for you, working with these people, making them feel your love, your belief, your care in them as an innately worthy human being, I think is a big part of your superpower. That's what you did for Bob. And I think Bob's story is deep enough and rich enough that we don't need to tell other stories, because this was such a good, deep story. But I think you should be going after these late career people, senior positions who've had the wobble and don't believe anymore. And I think there's tons of them out there.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll just, this may be superfluous, but I just want to add, like, not only was he concerned about age, but he's also a white male. And I'm not taking a position on any of this, and I'm all for diversity and inclusion. That's not the point, but I'm sure you are aware that for many men who also sort of feel a bit beaten down and like, am I of value anymore in this context? That was like another challenge point. But I just want to come back to your point about, how powerful it is to have someone in your corner who believes in you. And actually, it doesn't take a lot. I mean, I know how I respond in our work together. If you're like, not that you're patting me on the back all the time, you'll point out things I need to do. But if you say, you got this, or you did great with this, like any little nugget like that, and I can keep running that much further because I have that support. I'm not sitting here alone in my own echo chamber of maybe I can, maybe I can't, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. Is this right? And, when you're in a particularly vulnerable period, I would say it's almost essential to have someone there. And it's got to be someone who has no other agenda in that relationship other than helping you get what you really want and helping you be your best self. And that means that, like, family, no matter how supportive, that's great, but everyone's got a little bit, there's agendas. I'm not saying they're necessarily negative, but it's not purely about you and yeah, I think it's vital. The other thing I want to mention, and I won't tell a whole story, but I do want to make the point too that you mentioned self-concept, and we were talking about the perils of, when your self-concept is negative in some way. A lot of what I do with my clients, Bob and others at different points in their career, is on identity. Mm-hmm. Meaning, what do they see and believe is possible for themselves? And so I raise this in this context to say, and I love what you're saying about, people who are, getting negatively impacted by changes, particularly when they're toward the latter part of their career. But even with people who are earlier in their journey, maybe they're like 40 or late 30s, right? And they're getting passed over for promotions, or maybe they didn't even throw their hat in the proverbial ring, but they're feeling frustrated and they're noticing other people get beyond them. And they're starting to be frustrated by it because they're starting to see that the people who are advancing beyond them aren't really any more talented or capable than they are. And one of the things that comes up in those scenarios that I see consistently is the person I'm speaking to didn't see themselves as capable of being that C-suite leader or that next level leader. Like, they were just, again, doing their thing, being a good doobie, but they weren't necessarily reaching for more, not because they didn't want it, but because it felt so like out of step with who they believe themselves to be. And I just wanted to raise that again, because that's another dimension of this whole self-concept thing. It's not just rescuing, I'll call it rescuing for now, from a plunge in self-concept, but it's also helping to build up what's possible for someone who, for whatever reason, has like a set point in what they think they can do and achieve. And that set point has to do with, right, like that's not what our people do. That's not, my family doesn't do that. I mean, I had echoes of that in my own life, like having no role models in the business world. I wasn't thinking about getting to the C-suite. I didn't even know what the hell that was. And I just thought, well, that's just someone else's thing, until, excuse me, I started asking myself, why is that someone else's thing? Why isn't that my thing? And I love to encourage and help open up the aperture for people to see that they can step into whatever identity they damn well want to, and that it's not fixed.
And I want to just say one last thing before we wrap up. This man, Bob, his age and the fact that he was a white male. And I know in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a movement to basically actively discriminate against white males in particular in corporate. I mean, listen, I'm a brown man from the Middle East. Okay. So I'm a Christian. So I just want to tell you, that's where I'm coming from. But nonetheless, I find this to be very insidious and un-American that this is happening. It needs to stop. And I'm very grateful that I actually was part of helping make this stop, because I wrote a couple of books with Wayne Allen Root pointing out this cancel culture-ish type behavior on the part of certain corporations. And we've started to push back. There have been other up-and-coming American companies that want nothing to do with this so-called diversity, inclusion, and equity, or DIE. Right. Methodology. I want to see the best people be promoted. I think discrimination of any kind against anybody is wrong. America has had a history of discriminating against minorities. That was wrong. What was great about America, unlike most other countries, is that it saw that it was wrong and it did something about it. And unfortunately, there's people that right now, for their own insidious reasons, have decided, hey, let's play on the guilt that many white people feel and make them feel that they're bad, they're wrong, just for being white, which is as evil and discriminatory as the past was against minorities. So we got to step up and speak out against that. And I think, again, that plays into what you can do for people, because if you're helping, white males in particular who are senior people in organizations, and they've got someone on their side when they don't feel there's a lot of people on their side, I think that is powerful and will attract a lot of white people. So Courtney, we wrap up by asking you 4 things. One is, how do people get in touch with you if they want to book a call, find out more about what you do, et cetera?
Sure. So it's very easy. Courtney at Intersimone.com. So my first name at my first and last name.com. Very easy. I'm sure you'll have it in the show notes.
Yeah. We'll put that in the show notes. We'll make sure that anybody. So Courtney at Intersimone.com. People will be able to, reach out to you, get on your calendar, et cetera. And I think that's great.
Yeah. Love to talk to people.
Awesome. Then second thing is, every show ends the same way. We ask you for bullet point. So no story, just bullet point. Your 3 best pieces of advice for my listener. What do you say?
Okay. First thing, define your terms. You can't get to a place you're not looking for.
Yeah, that's good.
And you've got to make the decision. Second thing, take 100% responsibility for everything that's showing up in your life. That's the real critical step to cultivating your authority and your power. And 3, this is a tough one because there's so much more than 3, but focus on being the solution. Meaning, it's not just about you and what you want. That's all super important. But when you're positioning yourself for roles and opportunities in an organization, the locus needs to be on what's their pain, what's their problem, and how are you going to solve it for them? And when you can come from that, as opposed to, do you like me enough? Will you take me? It's much more compelling.
I like these 3. I think they're really, really good. You got to define your terms. You got to know what you want. You got to take 100% responsibility and ownership for everything in your life, and focus on being the solution. I work with a fellow who's helped me drop a bunch of weight and get ready for a fitness bodybuilding competition. Yeah. He has a whole bunch of quotes on his gym wall. One of them is, look for the answer, not the exit. And that's so similar to focus on being the solution. If you are the solution, you're going to help everybody. I think that's brilliant. Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah.
So listener, Courtney Intersimone is the real deal.
Yes.
go and get on her calendar, send her an email, Courtney@CourtneyIntersimone.com. That'll be in the show notes. And
awesome.
If this was an episode that you enjoyed, that you learned something from, and you've got a friend who could benefit from it, I recommend you share it with them, because that's the best way for you to be of service to another human being, is to share wisdom, to share life force, to share positivity that comes your way. You know, William Glasser, the professor who created, Glasser choice theory, said that the best way to learn something is to teach it to someone else. And what better way to teach something to someone else than to share a wonderful thing you learned on a podcast? Courtney,
absolutely.
So wonderful to have you here with me today. It was a lot.
It was a joy. It was a joy. Thank you very much.
You bet. You bet. My pleasure. And that wraps up another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. To find out more about today's amazing guest, the one and only Courtney Intersimone, go to the show notes at thethoughtleaderrevolution.com, or wherever you listen to this podcast, be it iTunes, Spotify, Audible, Google Play, Rumble, YouTube, or what have you. Until next time, bye-bye.
This episode has been brought to you by eCircleAcademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.